Attention, attention. My seminar is about to start. So, I don't know about everybody in the room, but most people know what the USDA did. But to define what's going on, essentially what they did is they took the federal definition for Delta-9 and turned it into total THC. And total THC is the formula which adds the acid back into the Delta-9 number. Because the way the USDA now sees it is that they are now one and the same. This would be a false representation of that because the acid, for the most part, everybody's growing for CBD oil. That formula really only applies to buds because it's down to the burning process that converts the THCA over to Delta-9. So, this has been creating a lot of different issues in the industry. Issues where there needs to be a definition now between CBD oil and THC and what you're using it for. Right now, it's a CBD grower's nightmare because to make CBD oil, you have to go through the total THC formula in order to make your hemp pass through it so that it can even be made into oil in the first place. So the new standard of the Delta-9 is essentially going to be half of what it was been before. Before, it would have been about 0.3% for Delta-9. But with this new formula that they have with total THC, and it now becoming the federal standard, and now that they changed it, 10 to 1, they aren't going to be going back. That's not how the US government usually works. So, essentially, to grow buds and to grow for CBD oil, we have to lower the amount of THC in order to pass under, because THCA usually stays around a high constant, and it's usually higher than Delta-9 will be. So, by that standard, it's now going way over what it was before. Things that were usually safe and legal, but with high THCA, which is good for full spectrum CBD oil, and the therapeutic benefits of it, is now out the window because now it's being counted as the same. However, in CBD oil, it does not heat up enough, like with using it in a joint or burning a bud in a pipe. What happens essentially is the THCA still stays THCA and never does the total THC conversion. And research has been put out that the THCA formula has been going well above how much THCA is actually being converted to Delta-9. The body doesn't even take in as much Delta-9 THC as what's in the package or the 0.3. So let's say you had something that was 0.3 Delta-9. Your body's only going to take in maybe about 2/3 of that between the actual digestion process. So to survive it, now what you have to do for Delta-9 is come under a 0.15 Delta-9. And for most flowering varieties, which you use for CBD oil and full spectrum, that is a very high unlikeliness. 0.3 has been essentially the Canadian standard since 1999, and what the US government based the Farm Bill off of when referring to hemp. The 0.3 has worked in Canada for about 20 years now. And the formula was created by the University of Kentucky during the pilot programs. And this formula was to say that a 0.877% of THCA convert over to being actually Delta-9, but this number is unfortunately wrong. Other reports have already come out that the number is somewhere more on the lines of 1/3. So you're taking, what the real number should be legally is probably a 0.3 to a 0.33 on that you're multiplying THCA on. So With that being said, THCA is now the new deciding factor when growing hemp or just about anything, even fiber. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to be able to find a way to control THCA, and more research has to be done to help control how exactly THCA is determined. In other words, the best way to pass total THCA and total THC is basically to find a variety that is low THCA. So now you're not only looking for low THC, which has been our goal all along, but now we really have to convert over to low THCA because the THCA essentially doubles the number, if not more. The thing about THCA is it's the non-psychoactive precursor. It doesn't give any sort of high feeling. So it applying the CBD oil is a moot point, as it's just another benefit that you can have from the THC line. It's a number that's generally affected not only by genetics, but also by weather and storage. There have been reports out that essentially it spikes during hot weather. And if you don't have your storage all set out and all prepared for a nice humidity-free drying process, THCA can be a variable number going up and down between weather. So, much like wood, as it bends up and down depending on humidity. So it makes it a kind of an inaccurate science to base everyone's livelihoods and legality off of. What this does is it makes it a completely random thing if you're going to pass legality. THCA has not been an exact science, has not had a lot of research into how it forms and develops in the plant over time so that more genetics can come out that have low THCA. The recent strains that have been coming out to help counter this was one out of Barcelona in Spain, and that's CBG. CBG right now is a bit of a worry because it's expensive and it's also unproven. Nobody's quite sure of the benefits of just straight CBG oil, and there hasn't been enough research done into it, but since everybody is saying that since it has no cannabinoids besides CBG, because CBG is a further acid precursor to all the other cannabinoids. Essentially, it's like having an octopus, but you cut off all its tentacles. And all those tentacles are those other cannabinoids it has. So it's unknown what CBG really does at the moment, and it makes it kind of a hard market to sell it other than it's new. At some point, a better option has to come out in order to pass through the total THC formula. At the moment, growing it could be a bit of a risk as well, because as many of issues that we've had last year, 2019 was a wet, humid year for across the country. The Midwest completely flooded. Driving over here for Arkansas, it's still completely flooded in the fields. And hemp itself does not do well in very high moisture conditions. And it's not something that can be grown anywhere. It has its ideal soil, much like every other plant. In a way, it's better to compare hemp to being like a rose bush, where you have to take care of it along the way to make sure the soil is perfect. One of the things that we do in the book me and Dr. John co-authored is we go through all the soil science that helps hemp come in legal, come in safe, and all of those environmental and microbiome factors with hemp. So most hemp will usually have a 0.2 THCA in it, especially if it's a flower variety. So if you have a 0.2 THC delta 9, you just got a 0.4. That's now hot. That now is going to be something the DEA asks you to burn down, even though it's very slightly off. And that's a bit unfair. During the comment period, me and Dr. O'Connor designed a plan through Kush with the USDA to bring the number of total THC up to a minimum of 8.6, because now that essentially the number is doubled, so should total THC. In order for everybody to have a thriving industry in the CBD business and not fail or come under or have really good crops burnt down for no reason. The only way that this is possible is if the USDA adjusts what they do to match the doubled number that they came up with. This imaginary number isn't going to apply to the whole industry. Another way around this would simply to have different standards if you intentionally plan on growing for CBD, rather than just smoking the flower. It would make them happy, it would make everybody else happy, because then they don't have to worry about all of their stuff. One thing that, another thing that came up with the USDA interim procedures is that now they're requiring a very discriminatory way of testing your hemp. Basically, these rules are now made for fiber only, and all these rules were made with only fiber in mind. The only way that it'll come, most plants would come under legal under this idea, to take the sample size from the top 2 inches of the plant, which is going to be your hottest because it gets the most nutrients, the most sun, it gets everything that the bottom doesn't get. And it isn't exactly a good example of the plant or the crop. So the top 2 inches might be a bit hot, while the bottom and the middle are all come within legal limits. They're determining the one and the worst factor for actually determining the legality of a whole crop. So by then, that adds another random chance factor to total THC and growing hemp. Now, when it comes to farming, the idea is that it all comes out the same each time. You know what you're getting, and you know at the end of the day you're going to make money at it. That's what's special about the hemp industry at the moment, is that there isn't always a guarantee. It's like Vegas, you go big or you go home. So you have farmers investing hundreds of thousands of dollars to grow 20 to 30 acres back in 2019. Just for, well, here's the thing. I come from Virginia, and I don't know how many of you have been talking around to people, but apparently those who've spoken to the agricultural department like we have, Virginia came in legendarily hot. And that's over the legal limit. Now, Virginia does not have the best soil for hemp at all. It's all very hard, clay soil that hemp has the trouble pushing through with its roots. And it's the fact of the clay soil is that it oversaturates during the rain, which will also drown the plant. The more stress is under, the more weaker the plant you have, the more likely it is to fail. And the more likely it is to fail under total THC too. Basically, if you want to grow a successful crop, you have to make sure that it's successful all throughout the year and even during the post-harvest. So, if you're, when it comes to Virginia, most of the people planted hybrids. Now, hybrids are going to be marijuana hemp mixes. A lot of it comes out of Colorado, but it's legally defined as hemp because it has sativa in it. It just really depends on what certain variations there are. And right now, there isn't a lot of knowledge going around about total THC. As most of the lab reports you'll find around here, they come way over it. It's a 0.4, a 0.5 on total THC, but many people will tell you, oh yeah, it's legal, it'll come legal in your state. So I do encourage that when looking into your state, you look into what sort of law they went with. Some went with a state like Oregon State with the 2014 pilot program. Others are the 2018 program. Others completely did their own thing like Virginia did, where it's a free strike law. And it's very similar to what the USDA is doing, so I wouldn't doubt they heard from the pipeline what was going down. Basically, one strike, you are put under DEA probation on your crop. They oversee and basically burn down the first crop and the next crop. They oversee every aspect of the hemp you're growing. But if it's seen that you did this on purpose, you're immediately arrested and you're charged about $2,000 for growing marijuana. So under this new law, through the USDA, it's very similar to this with the free strike policy. The DEA comes in, and after your first strike, you can't grow hemp for 5 years. So again, it's a random chance policy that's determining whether or not we can make money in this industry. It could come in legal, it might not come in legal, it depends on the genetics and the environment of the hemp you're growing. So the full list of FDA rules that came from last year and is taking effect sometime January and February is they're taking from the top 2 inches of the plant, which generally are going to be the healthiest, but could be also your hottest. And all states are going to be abiding under total THC. Essentially what the whole laws and ruling stated is that any state that doesn't have an approved proposal is not a legal state to grow hemp in now. Yeah, they'll probably have their own rules on it, like Kentucky, for instance, immediately backing out the USDA rules and saying that they're going to have their own. But the issue with that is that they are now no longer federally looked at as legal. Basically, any farmer that grows under the state plan, and the state plan is approved, they are growing a federally illegal crop. So to counter that, you would have to go and get a USDA license and abide by their rules anyways. So it's either you go down one door and you end up in the meat grinder, or you go down the other door and you end up in a meat grinder. All the state testing is now going to be done at DEA labs. Now, one benefit that they did give growers is forcing labs to have a measure of uncertainty. That's how inaccurate the labs are. And let me tell you, if you're going to be growing, you're going to want to make sure the lab that you're using is as inaccurate as possible. They're going to be your best friend. But being that the state testing is going to be done by DEA labs, which is going to be more regulated now that the federal government is involved, they're going to have a much lower measure of uncertainty than other labs because they're going to have to keep federally up to date. It doesn't say that they'll be well funded or their machines will be clean. It's just that they'll have a lower measure of uncertainty. When it comes down to that, basically, there's maybe about 1 to 2 DA labs per state. And if you have 1,000 to 10,000 growers, there's also going to be a long wait list. So the way around that is essentially you're going to have to sell your crop beforehand if it isn't put on hold. It may take months and months for you to get your lab reports back on your crop, but over those months and months and months, if it's put on hold, it could go several different molds that could make your hemp toxic, such as powdery mildew, which if ingested will lead to aspergillus in the lungs, which has to be surgically removed. So, of course, there's always a risk of jail time with any time your hemp goes hot. Basically, if you aren't seen as negligible and they see that they think that you knew what you were doing and that you did it under those pretenses, such as showed them a lab that was hot, but you have to prove that you didn't know that it would come in hot under total THC in order to show that you weren't doing it on purpose. If they see you've done it on purpose, that could be jail time on top of that. Basically, another thing that is a bit worrisome with what the interim rules have put through is that they're encouraging all labs to move over to the GC method, gas chromatography. Gas chromatography basically is made for total THC, but the problem with it is that because of its inaccuracy and needs for estimates, it's going to a lot of times it's going to overblow your THC numbers. So while you might have something, let's say like a 0.5 delta 9, it could vary up and down because it's an inaccurate science. It could be higher because it's being burnt and they have to measure it from being burned and turned back to liquid. So the effects of this is that essentially all the things put through by the USDA rules are things that are very discriminatory against CBD, even though it was defined, CBD in their report was defined as a legal use of hemp. Now, I don't know what type of CBD they expect us to grow, but apparently they want us to grow the least effective stuff possible. Top 2 inches to review, the top 2 inches of the hemp are usually the hottest parts of hemp. So they're likely, so there's a chance that they could go over just based off of that. Total THC creates a big overloaded number, especially if your attention is for CBD. It's an overestimated number that essentially drives up the number even further. Total THC originated in Colorado before being suggested to the University of Kentucky. That total THC number was a marijuana number to make the THC numbers on marijuana more sellable. So let's say their Delta 9 only came in at 10. They wanted it higher because 10 isn't as good to sell as 20. But total THC blows the number up by adding the acid into it. So the suggestions that the university had gotten has created a big effect across the whole industry because we're essentially treating a dog like a cat. And you're barred from growing hemp for 5 years after 3 strikes. So once again, this is all random chance when it comes to hemp. And basically, being in the industry is all determined by that random chance if you are 100% unsure. And unsure of the genetics, unsure of your environment. You have to be sure that you are growing in the right spot and you know what can go wrong and you know what you're doing. Not everyone last year who got into the industry had all that in mind. Tobacco growers from Virginia all went over to hemp, and they're all told, plant it like corn, grow it like corn. Leave it alone, put pesticides on it. All of them went to the co-ops and were told how to grow hemp in a field 20 to 160 acres, all like tobacco, from tobacco growers. Those farmers failed. Their stuff came in hot. Their stuff came in with mold. And when it comes down to it, mold in CBD can create immense damage to our internal body systems. And unfortunately, the FDA hasn't gone the extra step to realize this and realize the type of fungi that can go into CBD oil and the damage it can do. Things such as fusarium and powdery mildew are 2 diseases that come from the bugs and the ground. So basically, if you have to really test and make sure your soil is good, it's effective for hemp, and it's clean. Tobacco soil is not that. Now, one of my favorite things about hemp, and always will be, is that it's being used in Chernobyl right now to clean up the radiated after effect. It's taking radiation in and getting it out of the ground. Now, when you plant a tobacco field, it's a soil cleanser. The reason pesticides and heavy metals are found so often in CBD oil and found at all is because hemp has a soil cleansing effect. It's a very cleaning plant. But if we're using it for consumption, you don't want to drop battery acid on an apple and then tell people to eat it. So unfortunately, unguided people in the hemp industry have created a lot of money going around, but also a lot of property loss, a lot of plant loss, a lot of wasted potential for what their crops could have been had they done the right preparation and not went in head first, eyes closed. Unfortunately, with whole THC, you are set up to fail. THCA is a number affected by its environment, and it can jump up and down radically. We're talking by a hundredth of a percent to a tenth of a percent. And being that that's what determines your legality, you're going to want to make sure you keep an eye on that number until the THC bloats the legal number up. So where everywhere else is trying to go from Europe to China to South Africa are all looking to go with a 0.3 Delta 9. Us here in the United States are stuck with at most a 0.15. We're forced to go under essentially half and be left behind in the whole world. And then the GC method is being encouraged within their own report for their labs and the VA labs to use, which again will further bloat the THC numbers. You're going to have a radically different number to what the actual number is. And the states will be testing from the hottest sample of the plant. Not a good representation of what your total mass, buds, and amount will be in biomass. In total, those top 2 inches, if you're growing 20 acres, that may only make up about 1% to even under 1% of your total output. So if we're being determined by that, what happened, there are over 99% is being burnt because of one flaw. It's a perfectionist sort of industry that they are creating, and not the good kind, because THCA is not evil. What we have is before, last year before the interim rules, you could have a plant that tests on THC under the rules beforehand where it's just Delta 9 at a 0.21. It'd be legal. That would be standard special sauce, berry blossom. But then with the new rules, that number could go as hot as 0.5 or even 0.7. There are a number of 0.7s in Virginia, believe me. And that means the same plant that was legal last year is now illegal this year. One thing is with the extra growers coming in, biomass prices have dropped. And the USDA put through another majorly concerning determination where they listed biomass prices as $3.50 per biomass pound, when during the beginning of 2019 to 2008, beginning of 2018, this number was much closer to 250 to 400, to even the lowest being about 160 per biomass pound, which is essentially per tree, per hemp tree. This is especially concerning because it's now taking away the amount of money that we can make, and we're still paying a lot of money for each and every one of these seeds, these clones, and it makes it a losing battle if they start defining flower hemp at a lower price. It sounds like it's trying to crash the market, honestly, and that's what their interim rules could very well do. And so far in the southern region, mostly everyone planted hybrids. Everybody got sold on T1 and buyouts. The point where most of the southern industry was basically hybrids. And the thing about hybrids is that since its numbers can vary between 60% indica to 40% indica, the number of the original indica can come back in if the genetics are not strong. Basically, most are misinformed by the tobacco industry and those looking to make a lot of money to get in the industry, and ended up with a bunch of plants that have an affinity for going hot. Now, the real insult to injury is that the USDA refused to put out an official seed program to pass through total THC, which is one of the reasons everybody is moving over to CBG as a possible answer. Us at Hemp, we went more towards fiber, because fiber can be used for many different things. And as reported by the USDA, only 10% of all hemp growers are growing fiber in the United States. This was mainly caused by an upsurge in the price of fiber seeds by a monopoly made in Kentucky. One of the people from the university had a connection and got proprietary rights to all the seeds from Italy. So finding them has become a rare thing and has limited the market. So basically, we were able to get our own seeds through Italy, called Fibroflora, and we have them for sale. We are trying to get them out to as many people as we can so that the industry can grow. Another thing that's really hurting the industry and causing more people to fail than there should be is misinformation. And there's a lot of that, especially during the big media push of the beginning of 2018, when all of this went legal. One of them is that hemp is prone to carcinogenic diseases, and it basically defines a carcinogen. It's something that will build up in the body and cause cancerous tumors. So that takes over a long time to do, but at the same time, these diseases come from the heavy metals in the ground. It comes from pesticides, which some unethical farmers are using so that their plants do not go and mold. But the irony in that is that the molds, such as powdery mildew and botrytis, also are carcinogenic. Basically, they'll build up in the body, and they will harm people over time, and you will have a bad effect if you take the oil or if you smoke it. Smoking it is probably the worst way to do it if that biomass has powdery mildew in it, because the lung is a perfect deposit for fungi, which creates a mold spot in it that has to be surgically removed. Now, hemp for CBD oil cannot be grown anywhere because it is such a delicate process. It's something that has to be grown in a loamy soil. That's something that Colorado isn't going to tell you, is that they usually have good loamy soil, while most of the other country has a big variety of different soil types. And that's when I go back to my point that Virginia and Eastern Tennessee are almost as plain. Because hemp is a very difficult plant because there's so many things that can cause it to fail, from either too much heat to too much humidity. It's a double killer if it's both. But if it doesn't have the right soil, it's not good. And microbiomes in the soil. Now, microbiomes can be either beneficial microbiomes or disbeneficial microbiomes. Disbeneficial microbiomes are usually fungi. Bad fungi like mycotoxins and endotoxins. An endotoxin is essentially E. coli, which is something that can happen if the fertilizer is not dried properly. It's a plant that can take up a lot of just basically, I call it a soil sucker because it literally takes up everything. It takes up a lot of nutrients, it takes up a lot of micronutrients, and it takes a lot of nutrients each growing season in order for it to grow to its ideal conditions. If it isn't ideal, you have a plant with a weak immune system. With a weak immune system comes a myriad of other issues. One thing that many people don't understand is true industrial hemp can grow 16 feet tall. When it's combined with an indica variety, it'll grow somewhere between 5 to 7 feet tall. But for the most part, the more sativa it has in it, the more straight up it'll grow. And that's usually what it should be coming in at its ideal growth. Fiber is usually grown close together, but the further apart you actually grow fiber, since it's a cannabis plant like every other cannabis out there, it will actually grow buds, as you can see in those images there, or that whole top half and going all the way down the stalk is actually all buds. It will actually produce CBD. It will produce a medium level of CBD from it because it's just an outright sativa plant. Most reason that fiber has this stigma that it can't produce any CBD is because the practice with fiber is to cut it at 70 days so the CBD and the cannabinoids don't form. Because usually around the last 2 to 3 weeks is when it forms. Right now, and like I said before, it's being used to clean up soil. It's a soil cleanser. It doesn't mean within the first planting of it, your soil will be cleaned and the next crop will be fine. It takes it out over time. But it's found to be more effective than sunflowers and mint at doing a soil cleanse for heavy metal and toxic soil. So much so that the universities over by Chernobyl have actually been using it and using it to great effect and planting it all around the area. But that leads me back to my point of what is aspergillus. It comes from the fungi when hemp is burned or ingested. Basically, your main issue is one of the most common issues with hemp. And hemp will actually turn to powdery mildew. It has a very high and likely chance of doing that. So it takes a strong, good microflora soil in order to counter that and boost its immune system, because without this immune system, it's prone to powdery mildew, and when powdery mildew is sold on the market because of, and put into oil from people who think that this fungi will come out during the process, the fact is that it doesn't. Things like powdery mildew will stay on the plant because it can survive temperatures past 200, which is past the heat point of most CBD oil making processes. So for those who say that the microbiomes and mycotoxins are boiled out, are simply just lying. Our research from our book and official sources point that mycotoxins actually do survive that climate. The only way to effectively get rid of it, which many don't know, is to actually heat it up over a UV light. So many house-grown varieties are able to get rid of many of the microflora using a proper UV light. And if it was, it's as simple as putting in a plant before the process of making CBD oil, or the buds, or how you plan to make your CBD oil, under that light for a certain amount of period to help reduce the amount that goes in. Obviously, we don't want any of it going in because it can build up. But simply, a bunch of CBD oil makers are simply just throwing it in because they see it as a very low percentage if they're making millions of pounds anyway. So they think, what if one toxic one goes in? But the effect can be extraordinary, especially about anywhere from a year to 10 years down the line on how consistently you take it. Now, we don't want this issue becoming a big issue in the future, so we have to be able to police ourselves for the health of our crops and be able to get new information and good information that can really help us provide the best quality for this industry. Because things like this could really hurt the industry later on and scare people from what can be a very healing and great product, especially if they know that something